My Steam Deck OLED is ridiculously burned in. Now, before you start writing up any comments like, just don't have this type of static screen on all the time on your Steam Deck OLED, we're actually going to talk about a specific use case where that's actually going to be a problem on the Steam Deck OLED, why it's not as bad as this HDR part is, because I also have SDR here. There's a lot of really good data that I have done with all my videos so far. This is going to be the third video. I've done the preparation video, my 750 hours video, and now this video, which is like over 7,000 hours or over 9,000 hours. It's just a bunch of hours. And there is good news and there is some parts that you need to be concerned about. But more to the point, we need to talk about, there are a few comments that I got like, just don't leave it on that screen and then you're not going to have that problem. What we're doing here is accelerated durability testing, or otherwise known as accelerated life testing in Wikipedia. It is the process of testing a product by subjecting it to conditions, stress, strain, temperatures, voltage, vibration rate, pressure, etc., in excess of its normal service parameters in an effort to uncover faults and potential modes of failure in a short amount of time. This entire exercise has been to stress test the Steam Deck OLED's panel, not only because it is the first OLED panel with HDR on a portable device, but I'm testing this device with HDR elements as well as SDR elements in different luminance values at the same time, so you can get a better idea of what's going on. And I also did HDR in different colors so that we can see what that looks like and its impact over time. In fact, when we take a look at different games, when we look at other colors, the green, red, and blue aren't as pronounced, and in games, it is not as visible. In fact, only the HDR 1000 is clearly visible in a lot of different use cases when you can clearly see it's burned in. So what that means to you is HDR white is the most damaging part for HDR 1000. And any other SDR components we can kind of see, but not that much. And we're going to touch more on that just a second. But I want to kind of reiterate here on why this is important, because if we do accelerated durability testing on the OLED panel, anyone that says, well, just don't do it like that, would you also say, hey, Valve, you dropped the Steam Deck thousands and thousands of times. Perhaps just don't drop it all those times. No, they are testing the device and seeing where there's structural weakness, and when it's falling, they can then reinforce any particular area. This particular segment, because of what I'm doing here, is information that you can use to also mitigate any particular damage that will happen to your Steam Deck OLED, if at all. One other point that I want to mention, and I covered this before, but it might have gotten lost in the weeds, is that this is actually valuable information for anyone that really cares about trying to get the best battery life out of this device. The HDR panel, when you were to engage HDR and do all of it at max brightness, this panel actually takes 5 watts. That's actually not too bad considering, because I've had other HDR panels consume far, far more. So only doing 5 watts is actually pretty decent. SDR content is about 2 watts. So that's almost a 2.5 times increase in power usage. Now, the good news is that typically with HDR, you're not really going to be engaging all of the screen at whiteness at all time, but it will mean that you will have a marked increase in power use when HDR is enabled. However, it is only a small fraction increase, because most of the time you're going to have a lot of dark on the screen and only parts of it are going to be engaged in any bright white light. So there are some benefits to using HDR, definitely, and I don't really want to stress it and say that you shouldn't use it for battery life reasons, but that's just a nugget, fun factoid of information that I've gleaned from doing these particular tests. The other thing that I want to talk about in this particular segment is that when I have done my HDR test, because you can see it's HDR 1000, and I also did red, green, and blue, and stressing those particular subpixels, you can see what's interesting here. If we take a look at Cyberpunk, when we actually get into game, only the HDR 1000 at the top that all the subpixels were engaged is clearly evident as burn-in. Now, again, burn-in is a misnomer for OLED panels, because what's actually happening is that the half-life of the pixels themselves, the subpixel arrangement that is here, they are not able to boost to full brightness anymore. The surrounding pixels still can, but you can see that these particular pixels cannot, because they can't emit to that amount of brightness. It looks like burn-in as far as anyone's concerned, but it's actually a half-life of the pixels and how much brightness they can do. So that's another thing that we need to talk about real quick. But the good news here is on the HDR side. When we take a look at this in-game, the only thing that's actually visible is the part that is pronounced on the HDR1000 where all subpixels are engaged. All the other ones kind of fade away. That's actually good news, because now you may be saying, well, just don't have that static screen on all the time, and most of the games I'm going to have are going to be dynamic content anyway. However, there actually is an official tool on the Steam Deck LCD and the Steam Deck OLED that you can use that will have the same static elements sitting on the screen in the same exact place all the time across every game. And that is Mango HUD. That is getting the statistics on the screen itself so that you can see your frame rate, your battery life, how much your CPU is using, how much your GPU is using. Depending on the preset that you have, all of these 4 presets, depending on what you're going to use, are always going to have the same data in the same place at all times as long as you're using it. So that is something that you really should be thinking about if you have the Steam Deck OLED and you're pushing full brightness all the time. Now, the one thing that I do want to mention here is the small caveat that is actually good news. All right, so we have to talk about a few things. 2 caveats that are good news. Number 1 is, even if you have HDR content, the Mango HUD display is only ever SDR. It is never HDR. So number 1, that's good. Meaning that because you can clearly see on the left-hand side the SDR content that I have that is at different luminance values, SDR 400 being the brightness that SDR will be able to go at, if you were to push max brightness, that would be the worst case scenario that you get. However, the thing that is also another bit of good news here is that if we take a look at the red, green, and blue on HDR 1000 when we load up a game, you can kind of see that that basically fades away in different circumstances where it is not as evident that you can clearly see that burn-in. So when we only have content on the screen where it's going to have static elements that is engaging very specific colors, like Mango HUD does. So if you take a look at GPU, CPU, battery, and all those other ones, it's like green, blue, red, and all those other colors. Those are not white. Now, the question that everyone's probably just going to want to wrap up is, if I have the Steam Deck OLED, do I have to worry about burn-in? Generally speaking, no, you don't. You can just use it and not care one way whatsoever. If you find yourself saying, well, I use Mango HUD all the time. If you do use Mango HUD all the time, there are a few things that are good. Number 1, those subpixels that you're using are going to be targeted just for those particular colors, meaning only the other colors would actually be impacting anything. The other part to really think about is that if you're going to be constantly using Mango HUD all the time in that specific preset, you're not going to notice the burn-in because the Mango HUD is going to be in the exact same location anyway, so you're not going to see the burn-in because it's still going to be in the same place. So it's going to mask any burn-in because you're going to have the same static elements always in the same place anyway. So that's really something for you to decide. Again, this is just information for you to take. Now, the other part of this is that it's going to take a long, long time to actually show that burn-in in a real crisp way. So it's going to take thousands of hours. Will that actually be a problem? It really matters about how much use you're putting into your Steam Deck OLED. At that point, you really have to just weigh the pros and cons yourself. If you are using it for thousands of hours over years, you may just impact the resale value of your particular Steam Deck OLED when you want to get another Steam Deck 2 or whatever. So that's really where it all comes down to, is just whatever you and future you want to decide to do with your Steam Deck OLED. This, I find, offered a lot of valuable information. Number 1, I made a Unity game where I could figure out how to do HDR and SDR content. Didn't take that long, so I'm glad that I was able to just bang that out real quick, but it's also pretty cool what I've been able to accomplish. Doing full HDR was super cool as well, and getting the information from that, knowing how much power HDR takes. It's basically 2.5 times at the max, which is also really good information, and how long it takes for actual burn-in to happen, and if you really need to worry about it. Generally speaking, no, it can happen, but take the data for what it's worth. Thank you very much to my YouTube channel members as well as my Patreon members. Your support really means the world to me, guys. I hope this video was informative. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.